Hey everybody and welcome to Dominion Cards, the video series where we take a strategic, in-depth look at various cards from the board game Dominion. Today we're going to be looking at all of the cards that were removed from Intrigue, so they fell out of print when the first edition turned to the second edition. Now I can't do any random kingdom analyses on these, they're not in the online client, so what I thought I would do is I'd just do all of them, all in one video. Now, I haven't played with these cards for years, so this isn't going to be the most thorough and comprehensive ever for some of these cards. Like, there may be a little bit more to say that I don't cover, but I mean, generally people, for the most part, aren't really playing with these cards that much anymore. They're just fun to talk about, so let's get right to it. So first of all, I'd like to start with the simplest of these cards. This is Great Hall. This is a 3-cost action and victory card. It says +1 card, +1 action, and then, of course, it's worth 1 point at the end of the game because it's a victory card. So this is literally a do-nothing cantrip. So this is the term cantrip that we give to +1 card, +1 action, and all that does is just replace itself in its hand as though you had never actually bought it in the first place. And on play, this literally does nothing else. It is the actual do-nothing cantrip. It's not like stuff like Pearl Diver, where sometimes it's a do-nothing cantrip. This literally does nothing when you play it, basically. So, you know, it is worth a point at the end of the game, and being a action and victory duel type means that maybe there are certain things that will actually interact with it, but for the most part, you know, this card is basically not doing anything. It's like the equivalent of just buying a point token, right? Like, it's not having any actual impact in your deck. If you look at the Pearl Diver video, which is also in the removed cards playlist, this video is links to in the description, I talk about do-nothing cantrips more in general. You know, there are things like, do you want to actually shove a bunch of useless cards, just have density of them in your deck? Does that actually matter? In certain cases, we just talk about it there. I'm not going to go over it again. Now, even though this is worth 1 point at the end of the game, it's not helping you at all during the game, right? It only has an end game impact if you just consider, like, you know, the text on the card. Before the end of the game, gaining a Great Hall is kind of like gaining nothing at all in normal circumstances. So if you just bought nothing, the actual effectiveness of the engine of your deck would be unchanged completely a lot of the time. Now, some people say they miss Great Hall, you know, they kind of liked this card, and they do mention, like, oh, you know, sometimes I had other synergies with things like Ironworks. It gives you the +1 card and the +1 action, you know, and maybe, like, you can draw them with Patrol and you play them there. The problem is that the opportunity cost of Great Hall's actually pretty high, right? If you want to have it actually be impactful with these sorts of things that interact with this, you kind of need to gain a bunch of them, and the problem is that the card isn't really doing anything while you do that. You know, you could be buying something that's actually improving your deck and making your turns better, and Great Hall is just not doing that. So you can waste a lot of time buying Great Hall for very, very minor points that usually don't matter. Like I mentioned in other videos about cards that give little points, like stuff like Monument, for example. You know, if you lose the province split 5-3 in a 2-player game, there's 12 points you are now behind and need to overcome. And, like, you can buy the entire Great Hall pile and it still won't matter, you know, but that's a lot of gains to make on something that's really not doing anything at all. And I need to really, like, sell this quite a lot for people who don't really get it. This card literally does nothing, right? Like, it doesn't do anything when you buy it. It has no effect until the end of the game a lot of the time. And sure, as you start getting towards the state where you're just buying points towards the end of the game, if I had 3 money instead of 2, I would buy a Great Hall over a state a bunch of the time. You know, maybe that's better. I mean, unless I really specifically want to pile out the estates to get like a 3-pile ending, in which case I still won't buy it. But basically, it's a barely meaningful difference at that point. You may never actually draw Great Hall anyway, and so you never play it for its action. Mill, which is a direct replacement for this card in the second edition, kind of fixed all the problems that Great Hall had by giving an actually useful optional effect on top of it as well. So there are reasons to buy Mill, whereas there sort of aren't really reasons to buy Great Hall at all. So, you know, there wasn't really that much to say about Great Hall. That's it. The card doesn't do anything. But let's move on to a card that's somewhat related to Great Hall, or at least people think so. Scout. This is a 4-cost action card, and it says +1 action, reveal the top 4 cards of your deck, put the revealed victory cards into your hand, put the other cards on top of your deck in any order. So Scout is very, very bad card. In fact, it's so bad that it's basically a meme, and it's still a meme to this day on the Dominion strategy forums. People just joke about it constantly. Like, anytime new cards are revealed, there's a joke of like, oh, how does this card combo with Scout? And then people come up with the most overwrought and ridiculous nonsense, to say, oh, here's where it's good or bad with Scout. Anyway, this is probably, I think, once was considered the worst Kingdom card in all of Dominion, like worse than Philosopher's Stone, like just absolutely abysmally bad card. Most of the time it is worse than useless, unlike Great Hall, where buying it is not doing anything to improve your deck. A lot of the time Scout is actively making your deck worse when you buy it. Worse than useless card. So Scout will draw any victory cards that are in the next 4 cards of your deck, lets you inspect and rearrange any of the others of those 4 that were not victory cards. Now, most victory cards are unplayable, of course, like Duchy, Province, Estate, they don't do anything. The most apparent synergy being inside Intrigue itself with dual types, right? That's kind of why this card is here, because in Intrigue you get victory cards that are also playable actions or treasures as well. Now, a lot of the time, of course, when you're looking to draw cards, you don't want to draw the victory cards. You want to draw the action and the treasure cards. That's actually the whole point of drawing, right? They make your hand better, not the victory cards. Now, admittedly, the deck inspection could have some synergies, like all of the cards that do deck inspection. You can guarantee winning a Wishing Well guess. Magpie, you can arrange so that it draws the copper, and so on, or doesn't if you want more magpies. In addition to that, yes, it's true that drawing victory cards off the top of your deck means that the next time you draw cards, they're probably going to be a bit better because they're not drawing victory cards. Maybe this means next hand your turn is going to be better. However, the problem is that Scout itself tends to undo a lot of these benefits by basically being a stop card by default. So because Scout itself doesn't draw, like naturally, if it doesn't find any victory cards, doesn't draw you any cards, having it in your deck actively made your hand worse. So the hand that had Scout in it, you played it, it basically didn't really do anything. Deck inspection is nice, but it's not always actually all that relevant at all. And you wouldn't go out of your way with a card like Scout just to get it. It was kind of a bit like Navigator in that way, right? Like you didn't buy Navigator because you might be able to do top deck inspection synergies with it. Like, the card was just too bad. Otherwise, like, it's not that helpful. And Scout, while it's non-terminal, it sort of essentially isn't really offering any direct bonuses itself. You kind of have to have it reveal victory cards, otherwise it's just basically garbage. And if you draw just one victory card in those 4, then that's kind of like Scout being a Cantrip, basically, with a bit of a top deck inspection added on afterwards, right? Like, if you just hadn't gained the Scout at all, then you would have just had one of those 4 cards in your hand anyway, right? So, like, it's still not really doing anything there. What this means is that, if you just draw one card with Scout, and even if that card is like Wishing Well, getting you an extra card because now you can guess correctly, all that's really done is undone the damage that adding the Scout into your deck in the first place caused. You actually need to draw more than one card from Scout in order to make this worthwhile and worth adding into your deck. Problem is that under normal circumstances, that means that Scout needs half of the cards in your deck to be victory cards. Now, that's a lot of victory cards to have. Like, how many times can you think of where 50% of your deck, at least, are victory cards, right? It doesn't really happen, right? It never happens. You just, in reality, you are not getting that situation at all, right? Like, and, yeah, okay, in Intrigue itself, there's nobles, there was Great Hall, I guess it's Mill now, but outside of Intrigue, you don't really see many victory dual types at all. The ones you do see, what are they? They are, there's one in Allies in that split pile, isn't there? Distant Shores, I think that's what it's called. And there's one in Adventures, Distant Lands, that disappears once you've played it the first time, so it doesn't really count, Now, I have heard some people say that, oh, well, Great Hall is a combo with Scout, right? You draw the Great Halls and then you get to play the Great Halls as though they were draw, right? But this isn't actually a real combo in practice. So the problem is that you need a lot of Great Halls in order to do this, right? If you want Scout to actually be doing anything at all, really, you need to make sure that it's actually finding Great Halls when you play it. And the problem is that you could have spent all that time gaining all those Great Halls and all those Scouts, instead just gaining cards that are actually useful, right? Like even just gaining a silver might have been doing more for you than just endlessly buying like Scouts and Great Halls over and over again for just tiny amounts of draw. So in order to make Scout in any way useful, it takes so many gains that it basically never really overcomes the opportunity cost of it. If you are gaining enough victory cards and Scouts to draw, what are you even drawing? You didn't build, all you've done is just gain those cards over and over again. Oh, and of course, just for an extra kick in the pants of how bad it is, can't even draw curses, right? Like that's, so as soon as there's any sort of junking attack, Scout is dead anyway. Even Patrol gets to draw curses, right? Like it's a real shame that Scout doesn't. You could have seen it see a little bit more play if it did, but it just didn't. And yeah, so Scout was just abysmal, really. You needed to dedicate so much time to it that you just never bought it. It was easily like one of the worst cards ever, basically just absolutely terrible. So we're going to move on now to Secret Chamber. This is a 2-cost action and reaction. It says discard any number of cards, plus 1 coin per card discarded. And then the below the line effect says, when another player plays an attack card, you may reveal this from your hand. If you do, plus 2 cards. Then put 2 cards from your hand on top of your deck. So very, very wordy reaction there. Now, Secret Chamber is a combination of 2 pretty weak effects, right? The on-play effect, the stuff above the line, is pretty weak. And then it's also got this reaction, which is actually also pretty weak as well. From a standard hand, the on-play effect is only going to get you to 4 coins on your own, right? You play Secret Chamber, you discard the other 4 cards, you got 4 money. This is not really a price point that you usually have any trouble reaching at all. At the start of the game, you can hit 4 reasonably often, right? Just with your starting deck. So you don't really care about guaranteeing hitting 4. Something like 5 is much better though, but not 4. Discarding 2 non-copper cards only makes Secret Chamber basically a terminal silver, and oftentimes you will struggle to achieve even that. Right? When we say that you can play Secret Chamber and discard down to get like 4 coins, bear in mind that a lot of the time there's not really any point in discarding coppers because you can just play them for 1 coin as well. Right? Secret Chamber effectively turns any card into a copper sort of. That's sort of like the default way of thinking about it. So it's not doing anything with copper. So like even if you opened with it, like it can be hard to pair up Secret Chamber with non-copper cards enough to actually make Secret Chamber worthwhile. Now, yes, it can make you more money if you draw a big hand first. Note that this is very similar in effect to what Vault does, discarding cards for 1 coin each, but Secret Chamber is very substantially worse than Vault. Cannot draw to help you get there if you draw it in a bad order, right? At least with Vault, if you get multiple of them and you draw 1 early, it's still a draw card, right? It helps you get to that big hand size for a future Vault. Secret Chamber doesn't, it's a stop card. There are a bunch of cards out there that let you discard for some sort of benefit, and Secret Chamber is probably the worst one out of all of them. Right, so there's a couple that discard for coins. It's not just Vault. There is also stuff like Storeroom as well. The thing is, though, is that all these cards provide you some other benefit as well. So Vault's giving you draw, Storeroom's giving you plus buy, and also some sifting as well on top of that. Now, if you want to know a little bit more about when you might get extra use out of discarding cards for 1 coin each, the Vault video that I did in the Prosperity playlist, that will give you more information about that. It's basically the same sort of thing, discarding for coins. At least a lot of the information there is going to be relevant here. So there's no point in me repeating myself. We've got a lot of cards to get through here. So I'll just say, if you want a bit more info, the Vault video's got you covered there. So let's talk about the reaction, which is very unique to Secret Chamber. It's a bit of a weird one. So effectively what it's doing, you're drawing 2 cards and then putting 2 cards back. So it's sort of swapping the top 2 cards of your deck with any others from your hand. And of course, you can put the same ones back as well. So it's sort of like an optional swap and reorder in that regards. This only really has a minor effect on improving reliability, right? Ultimately, the top 7 cards after you discarded your hand in cleanup last time remain unchanged with Secret Chamber, right? You haven't made any difference to the first couple of cards that you're effectively drawing, and the ones you have the cards that you have early in your turn, so to speak. It's not doing anything there. And that means that it's not really improving reliability that much. One of the things is that a lot of cases in decks, it's kicking off that's the hard bit, getting started on drawing all the cards. And Secret Chamber is just not helping you in this regard. It's not making any difference. If you have a bunch of bad cards on top of your deck, they're either going to be in your hand or they're going to be on top of your deck after using Secret Chamber. And really, having the bad cards in your hand is not necessarily that different from having them on top of your deck, right? Still got to draw past these things at some point. So it is worth noting, and this is actually true of all reaction cards, including like Moat, but they usually don't do anything in this case. As long as a reaction card stays in your hand, once you've finished reacting it, you can actually react it again and again to the same trigger. So there's some cute things you can do with Secret Chamber. So for example, someone plays an attack card, you can react Secret Chamber, you end up drawing a Moat off the top of your deck, you put 2 other cards back, you react the Moat, and then because the Secret Chamber is still in your hand, you get to react the same Secret Chamber again, and then put the Moat and the cards back on top of your deck. And I don't know, maybe there is some reason why you would rather have the Secret Chamber in hand than the Moat. I guess this isn't really something you would do. You would just, after the first time, put the Moat in your hand and put the Secret Chamber on top, I guess. But I don't know, maybe there is some reason, maybe you've got a village and some draw to X card, and you would rather be playing the Secret Chamber and then drawing up on your turn. I don't know, right? It's cute, but it's not something you would do. But note that it is technically a thing that's possible with Secret Chamber. It's just worth mentioning. But yeah, you can just react this endlessly. It is true you can react Moat endlessly. Someone plays an attack card, and then you just react your Moat a million times, an infinite number of times, and the game never moves on. But people don't really do this. The thing with Secret Chamber is that something's actually happening when you react it. So technically, it is a thing that you could do to some extent for some reason. I'm sure there are ways in which reacting the same Secret Chamber multiple times outside the one I listed, is a thing that you might want to do. It's just a bit complicated for not really very much. Now, although it's a reaction to someone playing an attack, this is not really a defense card necessarily, right? Now, given, as well, the reliability effect of the reaction is so minor, it's not really making up for adding a Secret Chamber to your deck. Right, so whenever you add a stock card like Secret Chamber, you are hurting the ability of yourself to draw your deck, and while you might think, Secret Chamber makes up for that by giving you this reaction that helps a little bit, I'd say it doesn't really overcome the fact that Secret Chamber is a stock card and really hurts your ability to draw your deck. So is there anything where you might actually want to gain a Secret Chamber for the reaction? And it can be a defense against some types of attack, but a lot of cards, it's not doing anything. And it's sort of a weird partial defense against certain ones, and we'll go into why that is now. So certain attacks will attack the top cards of your deck, or they'll look at them and try to do something. And Secret Chamber gives you a bit of freedom in determining what exactly is revealed by those attacks. So examples include stuff like Bandit and Swindler. So with Bandit, the top 2 cards of your deck are revealed, and then, it tries to trash any non-copper treasures and discard the rest. Well, with Secret Chamber, before the Bandit hits, you get to put 2 cards on top of your deck, and maybe you've got, an estate and a copper or something, and you can put those on top, and then when the Bandit then unleashes its attack, it skips past these junk cards for you. Similarly, Swindler trashes the top card of your deck, and you get to pick the appropriate target for Swindler. Maybe you make it hit a curse, so it has to trash it, or an estate, something that otherwise the Swindler player doesn't really want to be hitting. Make it avoid hitting your good cards. So you can do this with Secret Chamber, but even with these types of attacks in the Kingdom, Secret Chamber still suffers by needing to be in your starting hand, right? Like, it's not, even then, it's really not a very good defense card. This is the problem that Moat has. Moat is much better at giving defense, but still, sometimes it won't give you defense because it's not in your starting hand. And, Moat's not a very good card to have in your starting hand, while Secret Chamber is usually even worse. Right, like, you really don't want a Secret Chamber in your starting hand. You want to draw it after you've drawn all of your other cards so you can discard all of those victory cards you drew, get some money out of them. Right, it's not an engine component, as we say, it doesn't give you plus actions, it's not giving you draw. And it's weak normally anyway. So unlike Moat, where at least if you have tons and tons of actions, you can flood your deck with a bunch of moats and then, get better defensive coverage and even draw a bunch more. Secret Chamber is not a card that you actually want to have multiple copies of in your deck. And that means that if your opponent's going ham on Swindlers or whatever, you don't really gain Secret Chambers to try and defend from that, because you just make your deck worse by adding in a load of Secret Chambers. So Secret Chambers are very, very bad in that case. As a defense card, it happens very rarely, even when you want to gain one for the defense. So in summary, this is just very, very super weak card. You ignored it most of the time. If you ever bought it, it was because you already built a deck that could draw a lot and had some value and a discarding, or maybe it had particular synergies with discarding cards as well, in which case, Secret Chamber works to do that, and, it is cheap, so there's a benefit there. It was also a bit of a pain to play with, very, very slow to resolve the reaction, and the reaction usually had very low impact anyway, but people were just sitting there looking at their cards, deciding what to put back, and it didn't even matter a lot of the time. Someone plays a witch, right, so I get to look at the top 2 cards of my deck, and then it didn't matter. Like, they sit there and think about it for a minute, put the same cards back, man, whatever, right, what was the point? Anyway, this was pretty boring, miserable card to play with, and it wasn't even any very good. So it was a clear removal in my mind, and it got removed. Great, we don't have to play with it anymore. Right, move on to Coppersmith. So Coppersmith is a 4-cost action card. It says copper produces an extra 1 coin this turn. So Coppersmith, most similar card that exists to Coppersmith is Bank. This is what should come into head straight away when you think about Coppersmith. Bank is worth 1 coin for every copper that you drew this turn, right? You play all your coppers, you play Bank. It gave you an extra coin for each of those coppers. Of course, Bank is also non-terminal, and it counts other treasures, not just copper, and that includes itself as well. Bank's always giving you at least plus 1 coin more than like Coppersmith would if everything else that you had was like coppers. Now, of course, Bank is also significantly more expensive, right? This costs 4, it costs 7, right? That's not nothing, but I do need to remind you that terminal action cards, a little bit more expensive than they seem due to something I call the terminal tax, right? You need to spend gains on more villages in order to support playing terminal actions, and that's not the same kind of cost in getting a load of money like 7 all in one turn to be able to buy it, but there is still a cost involved there. So Coppersmith, being similar to Bank, it has all the same challenges as Bank. You need good draw in order to draw plenty of treasures alongside your Coppersmith, and it really helps to have a source of plus buy so that you don't just overgenerate enormous amounts of money that you then can't spend because you haven't got any extra buys. Without plus buy, there are strong limits placed on the value of building more. It just takes a long time to build without any extra plus buy or extra gains, and there's only so good that your deck outcome can be. Like in a lot of games, you basically don't care if you generate more than 8 coins because you can't spend more than 8 coins in one turn. Right, and the thing is that Coppersmith, being a terminal, also wants you to add village support in order to make it worthwhile. So when gains are limited and there's no buys, it's actually harder to get that village support. Right, that's the sort of deck where the fact that Coppersmith would cost extra gains instead of a load of money all at once is much worse for it. You just don't have those gains, right? It's just very slow to pick up. So Coppersmith without plus buy sort of hurts even more in this regard because it just needs a bunch more gains to make it worthwhile, and you haven't really got time for those gains when there's no plus buy. Now I say it needs draw, actually it really, really needs draw, so drawing a deck filled with coppers is hard. It takes a lot of investment in order to do so. If you can get there, it is worth noting that Coppersmith can in fact provide you significant rewards, right? Coppersmith can, to be fair, generate you quite a lot of money, right? Like, it is possible for it to do it. But getting there is tough. Coppers are very, very bad cards to have. And if, for example, your draw is also terminal, then, this puts pressure on what we call your terminal space. Maybe you only have so much village support that you can realistically add to your deck. And then terminal action payload starts to struggle a little bit, right? Like, you have to spend so many actions on drawing all those coppers that by the time you get there, it's a challenge to then play Coppersmith as well. And even worse, if your plus buys are also terminal action cards like Woodcutter, right? Like, even more challenges added in. Now, one thing I have seen with brand new players, they look at Coppersmith, they buy it, they're like, oh, I've got a load of coppers at the start of the game, this might work. And then they draw a hand of Coppersmith and 4 coppers, and they're like, whoa, I got 8 money, right? Like, it's time to buy Province. And they think, wow, this is pretty good. And then you might start to think, okay, are there ways I can make this work? So, like, what if, for example, I flooded my deck with Banquet? Banquet is an event from Empires where you gain a non-copper card costing up to 5, but you also gain 2 coppers with it, but it costs 3, right? And you might think, okay, what if I just bought Banquet over and over and gained like Coppersmiths? Will I be highly likely to hit this hand of 4 coppers and a Coppersmith just because I've got like so many coppers in my deck, and like hit provinces and get them all early? This doesn't really work, unfortunately. The problem is that you can't draw anything else in your hand, like a province or another Coppersmith, or you basically fail to hit 8, right? Coppersmith doesn't really get you to province on its own, realistically, if you have no draw in your deck. You just can't get high enough copper density. There's no way to do it because you can't add anything else to your deck, basically. And at some point, you've got to be adding those victory cards if you go down this route. In fact, I'd go so far to say is that if you can't get over 5 cards in hand, do not buy Coppersmith at all. Like, the card just isn't going to work. Like, you must have draw to do this, right? I don't really see realistically any situation where you could have Coppersmith be worthwhile, basically, like, and where you can draw, like, it's just very poor. Now, the best thing going for Coppersmith is, of course, that you start the game usually with 7 coppers. There are some exceptions with heirloom cards in Nocturne, but most of the time you've got 7 coppers. Now, you only need to keep 4 of them around to be able to both buy a Coppersmith, because it also costs 4, and then start generating exactly 8 coins. And, hopefully you can see the value in that. That's a good price point. 8 gets you to province. And the thing is, you only have to do gaining of 1 card to then start hitting province as a price point, right? That's pretty good. There's certainly be times when that's valuable. Sometimes the trashing is really slow, or trashing coppers is difficult, like maybe there's only remodel as the only trasher. So you might be disincentivized from trashing all your coppers, but maybe you can get rid of some, and in that case you can stop at that point. And then maybe you have a reason where you end up trashing but leaving a bunch of coppers behind. Something like Donate is pretty common where you do that, but I mean, Coppersmith, Donate, maybe that works, but maybe there's better things to do because, it's Donate and it supercharges everything. But, that's the sort of deck where you can see that actually, you're going to get thin, but it's not worth trashing the rest of the coppers. Like, particularly with Donate, you get rid of the worst cards very quickly, and then, how much is it worth investing in Donate again just to get rid of 4 coppers? Usually it's like not, or maybe you have like 5 coppers with Donate, I suppose. But, it's just by using coppers, just having them at the start of the game just reduces the amount of gains that you need. But the problem is that trashing coppers still is generally very, very good. And in a time where trashing coppers is good, Coppersmith is completely useless, right? If you don't have any coppers, it literally does nothing at all. It sits there in your hand. Even if you play it, it literally doesn't have any effect for you. Coppers are very, very inefficient stock cards. Even with Coppersmith around, bear in mind that it's still less efficient, potentially, than trashing coppers and gaining back silvers, right? I need 4 silvers in hand to get to province, but I need 4 coppers and a Coppersmith in hand to get to province, right? That's 5 stock cards instead of 4, right? It's actually worse. Oh, and it costs me an action as well, right? So you always got that extra stock card space, and you need the extra action play over something like silver. And, there are some cards that let you gain silvers very, very easily without trying. So an example might be you get like Jack of all trades to trash estates because you got a decent copper trasher on the board, and that's just going to add silvers back. Or maybe you have a workshop, particularly one like Weaver or Groom, that can do other things, but then at some point they just very, very quickly can gain you a load of silvers back when you need the money. And in these sort of situations, even if Coppersmith was around, you are probably not getting Coppersmith because, it's just easy to build your deck back up with other ways, and you get the benefits of getting rid of all the coppers first. So in summary, Coppersmith is very weak, it's a very niche card. You ignored it most of the time. It struggled to provide enough value to be worth the effort to build an engine for it a bunch of the time. But, it was bought sometimes. It wasn't a completely useless card. I would say of all the cards that got removed from Intrigue First Edition, Coppersmith was probably the one that people tend to say they miss the most. Just, some people really like those really niche cards where you basically ignore them most of the time, but then sometimes you get those memorable games where Coppersmith was a thing that you bought, and sometimes that happened with Coppersmith. Usually you needed a weak engine, but sometimes there were cards that specifically synergized with it. So, for example, Apothecary makes drawing coppers very, very easy. Beggar plus Monastery lets you gain a load of coppers temporarily and then get rid of them all before cleanup. I don't know how good that actually is, but you can see how that could very, very quickly let you build up a deck, and you don't have to worry about drawing all of the coppers in order to get there to draw your deck first, right? King's Court, of course, turbocharges everything, and playing Coppersmith 3 times means all your coppers generate you 4 coins, right? Which is huge, right? You can get a lot of money very fast by doing something like that, and so on and so on. Not a comprehensive list, but there were ways to make Coppersmith work. They just very rarely showed up. Right, let's talk about Saboteur. Very wordy card here. This is a 5-cost action and attack. It says each other player reveals cards from the top of his deck until revealing one costing 3 coins or more. He trashes that card and may gain a card costing at most 2 coins less than it. He discards the other revealed cards. So this is a trashing attack. It hunts down expensive cards specifically in order to trash them. Then your opponent can gain a cheaper card. So it's sort of a bit like an anti-remodel in that the card goes down in value by 2 coins instead of up in value by 2 coins. Note that gaining is optional, so if you get a silver trashed, you do not have to get a copper as a replacement. You can just avoid getting junk in that case. This is also a pure attack card. There are no additional resources or benefits granted to the player that played it. It is purely just the attack. Problem is that Saboteur is in many ways much worse than other trashing attacks. So classic trashing attacks, stuff like Knights or Bandit, which is, specifically targets treasures, these trash a card and you don't get to gain anything for compensation from that. You just lose the card when it trashes it. Swindler trashes cards. They have to give you a replacement, but sometimes that replacement can be a junk like Potion or Duchy, which is even worse than losing a card, right? They also junk you at the same time. Being attacked by Saboteur is usually going to be bad for you, like it's a negative to your deck. Your deck gets a bit worse. But swapping a 5-cost card for something like Village, not really the worst thing ever, right? Like, I can deal with that. So sometimes, getting hit isn't really, hurting you that much. It's usually hurting you a little bit, but how much is it really hurting you? Unlike, of course, all the other mentioned attack cards as well, Saboteur doesn't offer any other benefit to you, right? Swindler gives you 2 coins, Bandit gains you a gold, Knight does a thing based on which knight it is, right? This makes it very comparatively expensive to play compared to its peers because, your turns are worse when you play it. But it also has a worse trashing attack than a lot of those as well. So Saboteur is a very bad card, actually. It's weak attack. It was usually ignorable. You look at it, first of all, this sounds pretty scary, right? It's hunting down expensive cards specifically to trash, but it sounds a lot scarier than it was. Saboteur really just wasn't very good as a card. So it does have some benefits. We're not going to say it was totally useless. So one thing, for example, is that it doesn't miss, right? It hunts down a card specifically to trash, unless they literally don't have any cards costing 3 or more in their deck or discard. It will always find something to trash. However, in practice, I found that the hunting effect of Saboteur isn't really doing very much or wasn't that useful. Usually it will attack the first card on top of their deck anyway, because it tends to cost more than 3, and so it doesn't really do much hunting or any at all a lot of the time. Now, it might be that you're playing with a deck filled with junk, But if that's the case, then the fact that Saboteur is not giving you any other benefit is also really bad for you, because it probably means that your deck is also filled with junk, and your turns are quite bad, and if you're spending one of your card spaces, and an action on Saboteur and getting no other value, you're probably having a very low economy turn as well yourself. Now, another time when it might hunt is before your opponent has had a chance to trash all of their starting cards. So if you opened with Saboteur, then sure, it's going to hunt down and trash your opponent's opening silver or whatever. The problem is that I would say that even if you manage to trash your opponent's opening silver, you've unfortunately added a Saboteur to your deck, and your deck might actually still be worse than theirs, right? Because Saboteur can be worse than just simply buying nothing, is the problem. You turned their silver into nothing, potentially cycled them a little bit as well. They probably still have the better deck than you, even after all that. So, Saboteur, very, very poor. Now, the primary benefit of Saboteur, of course, is that it can hit very, very expensive cards. There is no upper cost limit on this, like there is with stuff like, say, Knights, or it trashes specific types like Bandit. This can hit provinces and colonies, which is sort of the main thing that you were looking to hit with Saboteur, really. These are usually safe from other trashing attacks, but not some. No, even Swindler, which can trash province and colony, usually you have to give them one back, so it's technically safe, but not the case with Saboteur. However, the problem is that Saboteur has to actually find these cards in order to trash them, and usually your opponent has lots and lots of other cards that cost more than 3, and it tends to find them first. Right, how often do you have extremely high density of provinces and colonies? Usually not, because your deck doesn't work when you've got that higher density, right? And so the thing is that, it's hard for Saboteur to find these cards. And when it does trash something, it's not like it's making it easier to find the province and colony later, because it doesn't necessarily reduce your opponent's deck size. Right? You trashed some other card. Well, they just gained another card in response back again, right? You trashed the 5-cost card, they gained a 3-cost card. Well, they've still got the same number of cards in the way, right? In general, right? Same size of their deck. So their density of those good cards, didn't really increase long term. So this usually means is that if you want a real impact on your opponent's deck and you really want to hit those provinces and colonies, you need to find ways to play Saboteur quite a lot so that you can churn through and past all of those other expensive cards and eventually find their good victory cards. But, it takes multiple plays to downgrade one other card to the point of nothingness where they don't want to gain anything, right? You've got to knock it all the way down to 3. A 5-cost card will take 2 Saboteur plays to actually disappear from the deck. So you need a lot of plays of Saboteur, right? You've got to play it twice just to delete a card. Whereas something like Knights usually only has to play once to delete a card, right? So all of this leads up to the fact that King's Court was a genuine combo as such with Saboteur. More than any other card in the game, if Saboteur was drawn with King's Court, you might actually be buying Saboteur. It's not actually that unrealistic to say that if there was no King's Court, you basically were just never buying Saboteur. And it's not admittedly the only card, but by far and away, it was the card that made you want to play with Saboteur. The reason why is because this would allow you to run a deck where you could play Saboteur 6 to 9 times per turn, which is actually enough that you need to get rid of your opponent's deck. You could finally overcome their ability to just gain better cards to replace the trashed ones, And the nice thing with this is that, if you're just playing a load of Saboteurs, your deck isn't really doing anything else, right? You're not getting a load of money, for example, by playing these Saboteurs. But it didn't really matter as long as you were able to destroy your opponent's deck before they could destroy yours. They couldn't really buy King's Courts and Saboteurs to respond with, because they'd just get smashed down into nothingness very quickly. And so the deck sort of became just try and play all these Saboteurs, and then you can think about doing other ways of winning later, right? You just want to cripple your opponent. And so that was sort of the Saboteur experience, really. And so this was an exceptionally weak card while giving off an appearance of being strong when it just wasn't at all. It was very, very bad to add to your deck a lot. In some multiplayer games, people might start buying it, and those players, honestly, they would usually lose the game if they started buying Saboteur because it was bad for them. But the problem is that in the process of doing that, they would sort of just make the game miserable for everyone else. People would just be having all their cards trashed left and right and downgraded, and just everyone's deck sort of sucked, and there was a lot of like hunting around and flipping cards over and just whatever, right? Personally, I'm extremely happy to see this card being removed. I just stopped putting it in games, and games got a lot better, and then it disappeared eventually. Hooray! I didn't have to, manually disable the card in all my randomizer apps or whatever, so thank goodness for that. Saboteur was just awful card, really. Mountebank level of horrible, except whereas Mountebank was actually worth buying, this was the opposite, where it was just, you never bought it, but in cases where you did, it was just misery and suffering, right? So, yeah, just a horrible, horrible card. Good riddance to Saboteur, that's what I say. And last card of the 6 is a Tribute. This is a 5-cost action card. It says the player to your left reveals, then discards the top 2 cards of his deck for each differently named card revealed. If it is an action card, +2 actions, treasure card, +2 coins, victory card, +2 cards. So just some clarifications on this. If the revealed card has multiple of those types, so something like Nobles, you do get multiple rewards from it, right? If your opponent has a Nobles that is revealed, you get both +2 actions and +2 cards. If the 2 cards revealed are the same, so they have the same name, you actually only get one set of effects. The duplicate does not count. And sometimes cards have none of these effects, like Curse or most Knight cards. In that case, you're not getting any bonus at all. So Tribute can give out very, very basic vanilla effects, but which one you get is honestly quite random. It depends a lot on the type of deck that the player to your left is building. If they're building an engine, they've probably got a lot of action cards, and this is mostly going to be giving you actions. If it's a money deck, this is mostly coins and maybe some draw as well on top of that. Now, cards that have random outcomes can work. So there's a lot of what we call fate cards in Nocturne. They use boons when you put them out, and they flip over the boons deck and get some random bonus from it. The problem is that the fate cards usually have some minor extra effect on the card, but Tribute, the entire effect that you get is completely random. You can't rely on it for anything, so it could be a terminal draw card, could be a lost city, could be a festival, could be a terminal silver, right? Like, these are all very, very different cards, right? The ones I just listed, very, very substantially different cards. Sort of be all of them. I mean, not quite a festival, it's not giving you +buy, but you know what I mean? 2 actions, 2 coins, Problem with this huge disparity of outcomes, it's very, very hard to find a suitable place to put Tribute into a deck. Can't really build a deck when your engine components are randomly something else, right? You want to play a village, but then whoops, turns out it was a terminal silver, right? You sort of see now how that really struggles when you want to build a deck doing something like that. In practice, most of the time you'd buy Tribute is because you felt like it was going to be giving you a village most of the time. Like, maybe it would even give you +4 actions, which is a lot of actions, to be fair. It's a pretty good village doing that. The thing is that sometimes it would only give you +2 actions, like you flipped the same action card as both the revealed cards were the same. And that's very bad. That's basically Necropolis, which is costed at 1 coin instead of 5, right? I mean, you can't buy Necropolis, to be fair, but, very, very cheap, bad card. And Tribute sometimes would just be that, which is just awful, for the cost that it gave you. Or even worse, it could randomly be terminal. Like, maybe you flipped over 2 coppers, right? And it's just all it did was give you 2 coins instead. Like, you can't be having your villages randomly not be villages, right? Like, that's very, very bad for you. You just wreck your turn. You're just like, oh, well, going to play the Tribute and then I'll play my draw card. Whoops, not anymore, because the Tribute just gave me 2 coins. And 5 cost, by the way, is already expensive for a village, but if it's a 5-cost village that also randomly doesn't work, that's basically just a complete disaster of a card, right? You can't be having that in your deck. Now, Tribute wants thin decks that are well trashed, at the very least for the player on your left, more so than for you. There's a real risk of it revealing 2 coppers or something, and that's sort of a nightmare scenario for the card. You don't really want to be playing Tribute in a deck where something like that is possible. This would just make it terminal silver, which is very, very bad for 5. It's not just coppers, but, your opponent starts with a lot of coppers early on in the game. Yes, eventually they can have a deck that has like a ton of silvers or whatever, and you're sort of in the same situation. But if they can't like get rid of the coppers, these sort of awful effects of flipping coppers just happens way too often to be good to buy tribute. Now, sometimes you're going to get these decks with good trashing, and the payload is entirely action cards, and so people are building decks that contain nothing but action cards at all. For example, a strong bridge megaturn engine to be an example. Your only goal is basically to just buy action cards until you win all on one turn. Maybe something like bridge troll more than bridge with multiple players, but that sort of thing can happen. Tribute can work in these kinds of decks because it's basically guaranteed to be a village in this case. You will always flip an action card because your opponent only has action cards, but bear in mind there is still the chance that you could flip some duplicates, and in that case you're losing +2 actions from it. You only get +2 instead of +4, so there's still that awful randomness involved, and it might just randomly be worse if you get unlucky. Nobles, I would say, was probably one of the few cards that made Tribute worthwhile. It's the sort of card that when people buy it, they tend to buy a lot of copies, and it was a dual type, and also it meant that they were building an engine as well, so you were likely to get Tribute as a village, and sometimes it would draw you more cards as well. A lot of the time Tribute was not drawing you cards because people tend not to have a high density of victory cards, but Nobles was the sort of card where they might do. Maybe Mill these days as well. I admit I've never played a game that has both Mill and Tribute in it because I stopped playing with Tribute when the second edition came out. You could argue, maybe there's Great Hall as well, but of course your opponent should not be getting a lot of Great Halls, right? They just shouldn't be doing it. So that sort of deck really shouldn't be happening unless your opponent is very, very bad. But if they are, then hey, maybe Tribute's going to work there as well. It's worth noting Tribute anti-synergizes with cursing attacks. Do not buy Tribute if you're giving your opponent curses. Working on this video, I did remember that I had seen once upon a time a very old Wandering Winder video where he was playing back on the old GoCo client, and his opponent junked him with stuff like Witch, and then bought a Tribute, and on his turn he played the Tribute and flipped 2 curses off the top of Wandering Winder's deck, and then the opponent resigned. I thought it was very funny, that's why it came to mind, but you absolutely screw yourself over if you are buying Tribute in a deck where you're also junking your opponent with curses specifically. Tribute, I would say, people thought of it as a village, but it was one of the worst villages in the game. Yes, it didn't have to be a village, but you were sort of never really adding it for anything other than a village. It was just very expensive, and it sometimes didn't work, just awful as a village, really. It was so bad, it was so unpurchased, that when I started on this video, I actually couldn't remember what the 6th card was until I looked it up. I was just like, what is the other card, right? I just never bought it. I forgot that this card even existed, right? That's just how bad it was. It's just so low impact. Just no one ever bought it. Just sounds like it might be fun with the randomness, but it just wasn't, right? Because it just didn't really work. So that's it for the 6 removed Intrigue cards. As I said at the start of the video, no random kingdom analysis here because, I can't generate kingdoms on the online client that include these cards, so I just bundled them all together. It's all just for fun, really. I mean, maybe some people still play with these cards. You can buy them in the Templegate Games app, but honestly, they're pretty bad. I would say that the all of the removals were good from Intrigue, these were just awful cards, really. And I don't miss any of them at all. Good riddance to a lot of them, that's what I say. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.